that you are good for doing whatever is right and following the evidence, no matter who is on the other side of that evidence.
This hearing explodes as Crockett exposes double standards on justice.
One of the things that we normally look at when we are trying to determine whether or not contempt is going to be ushered into the conversation is whether or not there's been substantial compliance, and what it means to actually look like you have substantially complied. It means that you're taking reasonable steps to follow a court order, that you're acting in good faith, and typically that serves as a defense. So if we are still crafting the parameters of said subpoena, for instance, my colleague, Mr. Walkinshaw, just asked whether or not this would be limited to the Epstein subject matter. For me, if they responded at all, then there is some sort of compliance, which they did. They didn't just throw the bird. They didn't just say, forget it. But more importantly, I just want to point out that we are living in an age of hypocrisy, because my other colleague just pointed out that Mr. Perry sits here and somehow sits in judgment of others. Frankly, that is what people are kind of getting annoyed by, is the hypocrisy, because Mr. Perry still has an outstanding subpoena that was never complied with. In addition to that, he talked about we need to care for the victims. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, and I will yield my time. But I don't believe that Mr. Perry ever signed off on the discharge petition in the first place. So I don't know if he is just doing what he believes is politically expedient. But I will tell you this. I refuse to be a puppet, because Democrats tend to be of goodwill. We always want to do the right thing. We are always trying to follow the rules and follow the law. Unfortunately, we are living with an administration that does not care. We just want some type of parity. So, for instance, we all want to hear from President Clinton. If for some reason you said, we will give you, say, Pam Bondi, and then we've got President Clinton with it, or say maybe President Trump and President Clinton, two presidents, because we know that both presidents actually had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But what looks political and looks like one can get away with everything, especially since that's what the Supreme Court has stated, that's why it looks like it's just gamesmanship. You only care about following the rules so long as you can invoke those rules on what is typically perceived as your political enemies. This is why we are falling apart in this country. We are supposed to be about checks and balances. It should not matter whether or not you're associated with the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, independent, or whomever, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're middle class, whether you're black, immigrant, or whatever. But it seems like we only have a political agenda in this committee, and that's why everything goes off the rails. You only love law enforcement when they're going after black, brown, immigrants, that kind of folk, right? But on January 6th, you didn't care about law enforcement because they still don't have their plaques up. We continue to do the right thing and say, yes, apply the rules equally across the board, and then y'all play in our faces and you only apply it to one side. I am asking for one commitment, and then I will yield to the ranking member. Mr. Chair, will you commit to me, as the chair of probably the most important committee in this Congress, especially in this moment where people are concerned about the level of corruption that exists within this committee, will you promise me that you are good for doing whatever is right and following the evidence, no matter who is on the other side of that evidence?
Yes, and that is why I subpoenaed the estate. And we had no idea what was, nobody knew. Nobody knew what was in the estate documents. And I, without hesitation, subpoenaed the estate. We've subpoenaed the Department of Justice.
And that's where we got the birthday letter. We subpoenaed the estate. Hold on, Mr.
Subpoena, right.
Okay, we got the birthday letter, but we can't just get the evidence and then not follow up on the evidence that we actually get. I will relinquish the rest of my time to the chair.
At the core of her argument is a legal principle that many people outside the courtroom don't often hear about in detail: substantial compliance. In plain terms, this means that when someone is under a subpoena, the question isn't always whether they followed it perfectly, but whether they made a genuine, good faith effort to comply with it. That distinction matters because contempt of Congress or court isn't supposed to be used casually. It's meant for situations where there is outright defiance or refusal to engage with lawful oversight. Crockett uses that framework to challenge what she sees as inconsistency in how subpoenas are enforced and discussed inside the committee. She points out that even partial responses, if they exist, can demonstrate at least some level of engagement with congressional authority. But her broader point quickly moves beyond legal technicalities and into something more politically charged. The perception that rules are being applied unevenly depending on who is involved. When she brings up Scott Perry, she is not simply making a personal accusation. She is highlighting what she characterizes as a contradiction, how members of Congress can sit in judgment of others' compliance with subpoenas while, according to her, having unresolved issues of their own compliance history. That, in her framing, becomes the central tension. Accountability is being demanded outwardly while not being uniformly demonstrated inwardly. This is where her argument shifts from procedural law into institutional trust. Crockett is essentially questioning whether oversight hearings are functioning as neutral fact-finding missions or whether they are being shaped by political convenience. She raises concerns that subpoena power, which is one of the most serious tools Congress has, risks becoming symbolic rather than enforceable if it is selectively emphasized or ignored depending on political alignment. Her comments about parity of fairness and gamesmanship reflect a broader democratic critique that often appears in these hearings, that legal tools meant to ensure transparency and accountability are increasingly being used in performative ways rather than consistent enforcement. From her perspective, that weakens not just a single investigation, but the credibility of Congress itself.